Good morning, Mr. Secretary.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on.
Appreciate having you here. Now, first of all, Mr. Secretary, my listeners know whenever I would have your predecessor on, I always ask one really important question of the Secretary of State all the time.
All right.
Is the seal properly protected?
It's properly protected with me. Yes, it is.
All right, because I like to check. I know that's a constitutional duty of the Secretary of State's office to protect that seal. And
Absolutely.
I always like to make sure the seal is protected. That's so we'll just want to make sure. Double.
I would invite anybody that would like to stop by our office. We have the original seal that you can stamp and get an embossed golden copy of the state seal, and we'd love to have people stop by and see our office.
Your office is easy to find too. You're right there on the main hallway there, so it's pretty
Yes.
pretty good. Mr. Secretary, election hacking and election security has become a huge issue. You were involved in a conference on that. Was it this week or last week? I lose track of time. I've been gone for a few days.
Just a couple days ago.
Just a couple of days ago. It was a bipartisan effort, which I think is really important because hacking into America's electoral system or trying to influence America's electoral system knows no party, right? I mean, you would concur with that.
Absolutely. What drew me to this was that the campaign manager for Hillary Clinton and the campaign manager for Mitt Romney were both heading this up, as well as the Harvard Belfer Center. And so when you have that, and Google and Facebook were both there. We did this at Facebook's headquarters in Washington, D.C. So truly a bipartisan effort, and some of the best minds in America with regards to digital security were there. So it was.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It was high tech. It was good.
I want to ask you a little bit about what happened and what you learned there. But let me ask you this: how serious a concern do you have about our electoral system being vulnerable to some form of cyber attack or some form of hacking?
Well, a great question, and kind of a twofold answer. The first is I'm very concerned, and it has happened, is happening, and will continue to happen. So in that regard, we have come up with a acronym or whatever, if you will, or a way to look at it, and that is to protect, detect, and correct. So we want to protect on the front end. When it does happen, and it will happen, we need to be able to detect it, and then we need to correct whatever the situation is. And so that's the one answer. The second answer is just because something happens, or just because there's an attempted hack, and we're going to get into some terminology here if we have, just because something happens doesn't mean that our elections are fraudulent or anything that's necessarily nefarious has happened. And so we shouldn't let it get blown out of proportion. And I'll start with everybody should know that their vote did count in the last election, and not one vote was changed by the Russians or anybody else. We did have a free, fair election. There were hacking attempts. There were a couple examples where databases were accessed, but no votes were changed. So we have to stay vigilant, but people should know that, again, the best minds in the business are working on protecting our election system, and so I don't think anybody should be concerned that we've had fraudulent elections in the U.S. or that I don't anticipate us having fraudulent elections in the future because of the type effort that's going into preventing these from happening.
Protect, detect, and correct. I like that. Detect may be the hardest part, Mr. Secretary. One of the good parts of the American electoral system, but also one of our vulnerabilities, I think, is that we are a very diffuse electoral system. Each state runs its own, and we each have different electoral laws and different ways of monitoring things and so on. So if there's something happening across the country, it's not quite as easy to detect as if we'd had some sort of a federalized electoral system. Am I correct in that assumption?
You are getting right to the heart of these things right off the bat. This is great, Howard. What we have is a continuation, I'd even say a continuation of the Civil War, the effort between states that want the elections federalized, one size fits all across the nation. And with that, and we've moved a little bit in that direction with the designation of elections as critical infrastructure. So that's the federal government reaching in and saying, we are putting the election process under the same guidelines, if you will, as we do nuclear power plants, electrical grids, Wall Street, the financial markets, and so forth. It is that important to our way of life that the federal government wants to reach in and offer assistance. Now, the issue is how far does that go? On the other side of that, you have the states who want the states' rights that say, federal government, stay out of the election process. We've got this. And we are, in fact, safer if we have 50 different election systems than if we have one nationalized, because it's going to be harder for the Russians to hack into 50 different systems than into one national. So there's a legitimate
where do you come down?
Well, we just had the training of all 55 county clerks in West Virginia this last weekend. It was rather fortuitous, and I asked them this question, and unanimously, the hands went up that said they want to have the federal government leave us alone and let us run our own elections. The county's clerks are responsible for the elections in each of their counties, and they don't want me telling them how to run their elections, although I'm responsible for it across the state, the supervision of it. But take, for example, Braxton County still does their elections by paper ballots. Other counties do it, obviously, with machines and so on. So they don't want me to come in and standardize that across the board because they know their population best. And the people in Braxton County feel most comfortable using paper ballots. So we've got that microcosm here in West Virginia that we're experiencing across the nation. And so to answer your question, I come in on, I would love to have the federal assistance when it comes to money and so we can upgrade our systems. But I don't want them putting the strings on it, telling me you have to use this equipment, you have to use this process. So I come down on the side that says, let's have these 50 different laboratories. That's the idea of our federalism. And interesting that ties in today's presence that I'm coming to Wheeling to talk about the Constitution. Our Constitution set up a federal form of government that recognizes the rights of states, and we are the United States. It's a gathering of states to form this union, and not just one nationalized government.
You know, I'm a big federal government guy. I'm on that side generally, but my instinct here leans towards let's keep these things. The closer we keep elections to home, probably the better control we can have over them, and the easier it might be to protect our systems. That's a gut of mine. That's not any research. That's just kind of where I'm at. So I'm kind of arguing against my own normal tendencies for a stronger federal government. One of the things that we can do, that you all can do, though, is work together in trying to figure out where the problems are and what needs to be done. Tell me about this conference a bit this weekend. I read a bit about it. It sounded to me, or this past week, sounded to me like it was really interesting.
It really was. What happened is you have a fellow that heads up the elections portion of the Belfer Center, which is at Harvard University. So he's got some of the best minds in the business. Their students that ran this exercise were absolutely top-notch. These are folks who are making mid-career changes, and they've in their previous lives, like one fellow had 10 years in the CIA doing the type operations you might expect, with probably the focus maybe towards Russia and some of the folks that hacked our last election, or tried to. Delta Force or special operations people, folks who have been intelligence officers who were focused on that part of the world. They're the students at Harvard now that were running this exercise. Then you had, as participants, the person who was responsible for security, digital security, at the National Security Administration. So you don't get any better than that. Then from private industry, I mentioned Google and Facebook. Facebook has been drawn into this because apparently the Russians bought $100,000 worth of advertising, unknown to Facebook at the time, but after the fact it's been revealed that they did use Facebook. So whether these companies like it or not, they are being pulled into this elections, digital democracy, and need to protect it. So where Google and Facebook may be fierce competitors, in the marketplace, when it comes to security, they are partners, just like the Republicans and the Democrats need to be partners in protecting our democracy. And that's what drew me to this, and I was fortunate enough to be invited to it. And it was a spectacular opportunity to participate in this event.
One of the difficulties I would think, however, that secretaries of state would have, and then those under you, the county clerks and so on, is not being fully aware of what problems are happening at a security level. I mean, if there are some attacks going on, or if there is hacking underway, you may not be cleared for that information. You may not have access to full knowledge of what's going on. It makes it harder for you to do your job.
Absolutely. In fact, there were attempts, by all indications, there were attempts to get into the West Virginia either database or electoral process, and DHS knows what that was, but DHS to date has not been able to tell me, as the Chief Elections Officer for West Virginia, has not been able to tell me exactly what that was because I'm not cleared to know that information. I am working very hard to obtain that clearance. In fact, I've led the National Association of Secretaries of State's effort to get all Secretaries of State the proper clearance so that we can talk to DHS. But in the meantime, what I've done is I have worked with General Hoyer in the National Guard, because the National Guard for West Virginia does have the people who have clearances to get into that through the fusion cell to know what DHS knows. So I have hired someone, a National Guard's employee or personnel, whose sole focus is going to be looking at what DHS knows and the digital attempts to get into the West Virginia election database or process. And so he can then advise me as to what we need to do to take the correct steps. So again, I want to assure the people of West Virginia we are out there protecting. We are doing everything we can. And it looks like this might be a model for a number of other states to follow what West Virginia is doing. So we are out on the cutting edge, and we want to stay out there to protect our system.
I was curious when you announced a week or so ago, a couple weeks ago, I lose track of time, that the Army National Guard staffer would be working closely with you. That seemed like a strange mix. The Army National Guard. Why that? Why is that the entree to security? Help me with that.
Well, they work closely with DHS, so imagine they are very interested in natural disasters, say the flood that West Virginia had last year. They need to be tied into the federal assistance and ability to help people in their hour of need. And so, again, I mentioned some of this critical infrastructure, say it's the electrical power grid or a water supply, those sorts of things. That's why the National Guard is so involved with the Department of Homeland Security. Well, as mentioned earlier, elections has now been elevated to that same level, and it's important. But the National Guard has limited resources. They, up until now, haven't had the personnel to spend the time to look into this digital attacks. And so that's what I'm doing, as I'm using Secretary of State resources to hire that person to look into the digital attacks. And so to let you know, one of the other things, and I was doing this at the conference, I was leading the effort to say, let's standardize our language, because what pinging, hacking, breaches, intrusions, all mean different things to different people. And so I was pushing the federal agencies. I was saying, let's standardize that, because what the best, it drives my information officer, Dave Tackett, crazy, because everybody keeps using the word hack. And there's no good definition of a hack. It sounds bad. It sounds like they've gotten in and done something nefarious. When in reality, what happened this last year, it appears that maybe a better word is pinging. And even that doesn't have a definite definition. But it sounds like somebody, in that case, is just looking for an opening, looking for a portal to get into. And if they find an open door, then they go in.
They're testing.
They didn't find an open door in the West Virginia system, at least not to my knowledge, but they were pinging the West Virginia system.
Yeah, the pinging is a test. They're testing. They're looking see if there's a vulnerability someplace. Bing, 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 bing.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I want to go back to my point earlier. You mentioned protect, detect, and correct, and to me, detect is a real difficult part of it. It's difficult to even know when you have been hacked or pinged or whatever. I think one of the things that was done at this conference was a role playing, if you will, or a game set up there where you had an election and people had to figure out in real time what was happening, as elections may or may not have been hacked. And I'm going to use that word for lack of a better word.
Right.
So, but have been hacked. And one of the problems is in making, you're on election day, you're going to make decisions pretty quickly. And that's one of the hard things to do, this detect part of it.
And this was an excellent example, a learning lesson for me. In this role playing, I was the communications director for the state that was subject to this tabletop exercise. And at one point, I was handed an email from one of the counties that said, "We got this from your office, saying that the electronic systems have been attacked, and therefore we should shut them down and go to paper ballots." And I had not sent that message out. So several flags start going up, okay? First of all, I have to tell them, no, that's a bad email. We did not send it out. Somebody else is sending that. So I not only have to tell them, no, don't shut down your electronic machines, but I now need to go back, and that was the flag to me. My email has been hacked. It's been compromised. Mm-hmm. And so do I shut it down, or do I try to correct it while the election's going on? Do I need to contact the other counties to let them know if they got those messages, don't act on that information?
Did you come out of this seeing a bigger problem, or did you come out of this seeing possible solutions? Were you more optimistic or pessimistic after you left this conference?
Again, I'll answer you with a little bit of both. I mean, when you're sitting there talking face-to-face with Hillary Clinton's campaign manager, whose emails were exposed because everything he sent to John Podesta was revealed, was laid out in front of the public, and he's sitting there with his tail between his legs looking at you and saying, it's going to happen. They're after us, as well as Mitt Romney. His campaign was hacked as well, and they said we were having to apply campaign resources to shut down these, the compromises rather than getting our message out. And so in that regard, we all have to be vigilant and know that that's going to happen. On the other side, when you see Facebook and Google working together to say we've got your back, and by way of example, it was interesting to hear their technology or their terminology. They talked about vectors of attack. This is ways that people get into the system and compromise your system and so forth. One of the ways was to pick one portal and just overwhelm it with information, flood it. And once they've broken into it, now you've got an issue. Or everybody's heard of just sending so many emails to one site, it shuts down somebody's email account. Right. Well, when that happens, what Google offered up is let us know. We can help shut that down and go through the cloud, go through Google's capabilities. You can't overwhelm Google with the emails, and then use their portal or their server to then get your information out. So that's the kind of help we're getting from private industry, and that's what gives me hope that we do have allies in this, and we're all in this thing together to protect our democracy.
Mr. Secretary, I have to move on, but very quickly, you're up here in Wheeling today. It's Constitution Day. Is it Independence Hall, I think, that you're going to be in? That's
correct. Yes, I'm looking forward to it.
Students are going to be there, among others, and what are you going to tell them very quickly?
We're going to talk about the Constitution, and I'm basically going to talk about the importance of building a Constitution, the drafting of the Constitution, the substance of the document, and then safeguarding constitutionalism and how important that is, and how our founding fathers cracked that code and gave us one that's lasted these 230-some years. And we all need to now cherish it, protect it, and give it forth to our kids so that they can enjoy the freedoms we've enjoyed.
Good. Mr. Secretary, I appreciate your time today. Good talking to you. We'll do it again soon, I'm sure. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Howard.
Thank you.
Bye.